I'm going back today and revisiting another old book review. And as always, I'll leave a link in the description down below to the original review. This one is Understanding Second Language Acquisition by Lourdes Ortega. Now, this is a textbook. I read this on a second language acquisition course that I took when I was doing a master's program in applied linguistics. Second language acquisition is just an academic way of saying how people learn another language. So it's not your mother tongue, it's not your first language. It's a second language that you learn, and they call it second language acquisition because some academics draw a distinction between learning, as in something you do in school where you're actively studying, and acquiring a language, like just picking it up naturally in a naturalistic setting. And the acquisition is meant to cover both scenarios. So, second language acquisition just means learning other languages after your first one. So, as part of this master's program, I took a course in second language acquisition, and this was the assigned textbook. And each week, we'd be assigned a different chapter. We were assigned them out of order, which doesn't really matter because the chapters are arranged by theme, so you can read them in pretty much any order. And we were assigned various other readings for that week, academic journal articles that would be on the same topic. And I did my best to keep up with the reading when I was doing that course. But, if you've ever taken a graduate level course in anything, I guess you know that the professors will intentionally assign you more reading than they know is possible to do in a week. And the idea is that you're not supposed to read every word. You're supposed to skim things over, get the main ideas, and take out what's important, which was a difficult jump for me. I'm used to just kind of going through slowly and taking in every word, but I did my best with this. So some weeks I found time to read the whole chapter. Some weeks I just skimmed it. Either way, the chapters were assigned out of order, so I didn't get a feeling like I had really read the book cover to cover. But I kept the book with me. And when I was in Cambodia working at a job teaching English, I decided it was going to be time to revisit this book, and read it cover to cover, and I did eventually. Now, this book is written in a style that, in my opinion, is not easy to read. As always, take me with a grain of salt. I was just prior to filming this review, just going on to Amazon to look at their ratings. And there were a couple people who like me, complained that the style of the book was not easy to read, but only a couple. It was full of 5-star ratings with people said it's a great resource. The Lourdes Ortega writes in a very accessible style. But I found it difficult. And to illustrate what I mean, I'm going to quote from a section. This is from page 37, when Ortega is describing the phenomenon of markedness. So here's an example of how this book can read. Okay. Markedness is another important source of universal influence when learning human languages that is known to interact with L1 influences. This term has been used by linguists in a number of different ways. In SLA, second language acquisition, it has been used to denote a closed set of possibilities within a linguistic system where the given possibilities rank from simplest and most frequent across languages of the world, or unmarked, to most complex and most rare, or marked. In addition, a special characteristic of many, but not all, markedness sets is that each marked member presupposes the existence of the less marked members, and never the other way around. In other words, the markedness relationship is implicational and unidirectional. End quote. Okay, so I don't know about you. Reading that the first time through, I could not make heads or tails of it. And markedness maybe is a little bit confusing the first time around, but it's not necessary. It can be described in easier language. Basically, what it means is if you have a set of possibilities in human languages, for example, some languages have relative clauses, some languages don't have relative clauses, some languages have voiced sounds, some languages don't have voiced sounds. If you compare them across all human languages, the features that are most common across all of human languages are unmarked. The features that are rare are marked. So you don't, doesn't need to be described in such academic jargon. And in fact, just because I'm going to stay on this point a little bit longer, I have with me another book here, which I've reviewed on this channel, Chomsky's Universal Grammar. And if you go and listen to my review of this, you'll know that I spent a lot of time complaining that this book was very difficult to understand. But one thing I think that it does do well, the beginning chapters are quite accessible and describe things in a way that is clear and easy to understand. So here is their description of marked. So I'm quoting from a different book to give you some contrast. The distinction between periphery and core is not absolute, but a continuum of markedness. Okay, I know that wasn't a great sentence, but that's continuing on from the sentence before. Some aspects of grammar are totally derived from UG, some less derived, some quite unrelated. Markedness, here's where I should have started. Markedness means departure from the usual neutral form in one way or the other. The black sheep is marked. The white sheep, unmarked, because sheep are expected to be white. The albino crow is marked because crows are expected to be black. The more something departs from UG, universal grammar, the more it is marked. The central core is unmarked, the neutral expected form of human language. The unmarked version of the head perimeter is that, okay, so here it gets a little bit complicated again. But I actually wrote in the margin here. Can you see this? You can't see this because my camera is showing this in reverse image. But I said much better than Ortega, exclamation mark, because it just struck me as a much more clearer explanation of the same thing. Now, to be perfectly fair to Ortega, if you continue reading down that same page in which she's talking about markedness, she actually does go on to explain it in more simpler languages and give concrete examples of what she actually means. I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but you can search this easily enough. Page 37 of Lourdes Ortega's books. Look it up on Google Books or something. And this is actually typical of the way that the book is written, where we have the initial concept introduced in academic gibberese, which is just very dense and very difficult to get into. And then we have that later clarified in more simpler language further down the page. So if anything ever seems like you can't make sense of this book, just persevere, and it will usually become clearer as you read it. There were a handful of times there were some sentences on the page that I just couldn't make any sense of, no matter how many times I went back to them, and no matter how much I read further on down the chapter, but only a handful out of 254 pages. Most of them I did get in the end. Now, is this the best introductory book for an introductory course in second language acquisition? I think there are books out there that are written in clearer language. In fact, the most clear book, in my opinion, that I've come across, that's just written in very straightforward, simple to read English, is How Languages Are Learned by Spada and Lightbound. And I've reviewed that on this channel as well, and we'll leave a link to my review of that in the description down below. But that is, in my experience, rarely assigned on master's level courses, because it's not an academic book. And at the master's level, you are expected to grapple with academic texts. Because not only do you have to read the core textbook, but the professors assign articles from academic journals, which are written often in a very highly technical language. So in that sense, if you want the most accessible book to read on second language acquisition, I don't think this is it. But if you want a book that's kind of a midway between accessible and academic, and something like a little midwife to help you get into the academic material, I think this book can work in that regard, because it has a lot of academic type sentences, but then it goes on to explain them more, and then you go back and you reread some of those more thicker academic sentences, and you're like, that's what she meant. Yeah, I mean, my experience at the master's level is you're just expected to read academic texts. So I don't know if I have any legitimate grounds to complain about it being dense and difficult to read. Let me know what you thought of this book. Typically, a book like this, in my experience, when I post reviews like this on YouTube, the video will tend to accumulate views from people who are reading this book in their course, or have already read this book, or are looking for a guide for this book. Oh, by the way, this maybe 13 minutes into the video might be a little bit late to make this disclaimer, but I'm not an expert on anything. I've done an entry-level course on second language acquisition, but I'm going to be reviewing this book from the standpoint of readability. I'm not going to be critiquing it for its accuracy or anything like that. Okay, readability out of the way. While I'm here, I'll just comment on a few different things I learned from this book that I thought were interesting, for whatever they may or may not be worth. The age at which people learn languages, I thought was interesting. Now, I had always thought, just because this seems to be common wisdom, that after a certain point in childhood, your window to learn a second language fluently cuts off. Like if you don't learn a second language by 9, you could never learn it fluently to the point of a native speaker. But it turns out that it's much more complicated than this. Statistically, this appears to be true, but researchers have trouble explaining why, and there are conflicting explanations as to why this might be. So some people think it's because of some sort of biological clock operating in our brain, that after a certain point, the uploading software as it were, the part of our brain that is able to absorb a second language and learns it, just gets rewritten over for other stuff. But that's all supposition. The assumption I got reading this book, as well as the other the other literature on SLA, is that really the cognitive science is just not there yet. We don't know enough about how the brain works yet, or how the brain operates, to really say anything concretely about how the brain learns languages. So some people think it might have to do with something about a biological clock in the brain, but it's not clear. Other people think that it may be because of the interference of the first language. It's not because anything has changed in your brain. It's because your brain already has one language in it, and that is messing with the chance of learning another language. Other people think it's just because of the different environments of a child and an adult. As a child, you just get immersed in your mother tongue, that your mother is speaking to you all the time. As an adult studying a second language, you just don't get that kind of exposure. But even more surprisingly, there are cases where adults do fluently learn another language. Now, these are rare, but they do exist. According to the book, as much as 5% to up to 25% of learners, given a fair chance of success, can learn a second language fluently as an adult. And so if that's true, then it's rare, but it exists. So if it exists, then that makes it much harder to explain why most people have trouble learning a second language, or the anecdotal wisdom that you can't fluently learn a second language after childhood. The other thing that I thought was interesting related to this is, contrary to popular wisdom, adults actually pick up a foreign language faster than children, at least initially. So if adults are put into, an adult and a child are put into a foreign country in a naturalistic setting, the adults will have the initial advantage over the child. They'll use their mature learning abilities to dissect the language faster than the child, pick out the useful phrases faster, kind of put together working hypothesis of how the language works faster than the child will. The child, by contrast, will have a prolonged silent period where they're not really saying anything. Now, eventually, in those immersion settings, like immigrating to another country's settings, the child, once they eventually start learning the language, will then go on to surpass the adult eventually, once they get going. But the adult has an initial advantage for about a year in the immersion settings. But that's in the immersion settings. That's if you immigrate to another language, if you immigrate to another country. If you're studying a foreign language in the classroom, which is how we typically think of how foreign languages are learned, then the adult again has an advantage over the child. They're able to study better, learn better for the foreign language. And that advantage, the children never catch up. Now, ultimately maybe that the child will benefit from having started learning the language younger, because they'll just have more years of life to learn the language, assuming that both the child and the adult start at a certain age and then just keep studying until they die. But in terms of in real time, even after 5 years, the child still has not caught up to the adult. The foreign language instruction in the classroom just advantages the adults. The adults has more learning strategies, and it's not a naturalistic setting where they would just pick up the language like children have an advantage doing. Now, this I thought was really interesting, and this is a little piece of information that I have used in my schools when I've been working in Cambodia, when I was working in Vietnam, because it comes up a lot. For example, I was working in Cambodia, and I'd been teaching an adult class, and then I had started teaching the young learner program at the same school. And we noticed that the young learner program had way more grammar points that the students were supposed to learn over the same amount of time as the adults. You know, the adults would learn like 3 grammar points over the course of the term, the 10 weeks, and the young learners had 9. And I was talking with a coworker about this, and the coworker said, yeah, it's because they're young learners. They just pick it up faster, so we can cram more grammar points in. And I said, no, it's the opposite. And I still had the book with me at the time, Ortega's book. And I said, look at this. They actually learn it slower when they're in the foreign language classroom. I had the same discussion in Vietnam when I was working at a school which also made the same erroneous misconception. They were redesigning the children's program to make it more grammar intensive for the younger learners. And again, the assumption by the planners of that program were that the children can just pick up the grammar faster. And again, I pointed out exactly where in the book Ortega was saying that no, the children actually learn it slower. Not that it did any good in either school. They didn't listen to me. Once they've decided on a program, they just go ahead with it. But I've just for my own satisfaction, I found it useful to rely on that book. Other interesting things about this book, there's a section which says that when learners are learning a new form, new grammar point, or new vocabulary, if they have the opportunity to discuss it together in their native language, they may be able to better learn it than if they're only able to discuss it in English. So like you're introducing the past perfect continuous or some kind of complex grammar form. If they're only able to discuss that grammar form in English, it might limit their ability to understand it. But if you let them discuss it in their native language with each other, they may be able to better understand it, according to the research. This is from section 4.10 of Ortega's book, Learner-Initiated Negotiation of Form. And again, this is something that changed my teaching. I used to be English only in the classroom type guy. And I read that as well as some other literature on the value of using the student's native language in the classroom. And I was in Cambodia at the time. I couldn't speak Cambodian. I'm in Vietnam now, and my Vietnamese is very limited. So I can't participate in the discussions themselves, but letting the learners talk about it in their language is useful. Another thing I found that was interesting is how a lot of English learners were able to gain confidence and able to gain their sense of their English identity through social media. So they would have like a blog on something that they found interesting. Like, they would have a blog about anime or a blog about comic books or a blog about their hobbies, in which they were trying to express about their hobbies and communicate with the wider world, because most of the internet is in English, or a good portion of the audience of the internet is in English. So to connect with this wider audience and discuss about their hobbies, be it comic books or anime or video games, they were blogging in English, and this gave them confidence and gave them a sense of having an identity as an English user. So this is again something that I read. I thought about it, and it directly influenced my teaching. When I was in Cambodia, I tried to do projects in which I got the students to write stuff for social media. Like we're going to have a class blog where we publish your stories on the blog. It was an idea I was enthusiastic about at the time, right after reading Ortega's book, and again some other stuff related to it. Looking back on it, I wonder a little bit if there were more privacy concerns that I should have considered before publishing student material on the internet. Although, in my defense, I did tell the students in advance that this was going to be published on the internet, so they knew they were writing for that audience. But still, privacy concerns may have been something to think about, at least when implementing it in the classroom. As far as the students going and starting a blog or a YouTube channel on their own and talking about something that they're passionate about, that's completely different. There were some other bits and bobs I found that were interesting in this book, but I think I've covered most of them here. So, I'm going to call this good, and I suspect that people who are reading this book in their textbook, people who are reading this book as a textbook in their classrooms, may find this video in the future. And if so, by all means, leave me a comment about how you're finding this book. What's interesting about it to you? How are you finding the reading style? Are you understanding most of it? Is it accessible? Let me know how you are enjoying this book. I'd be interested to know.